Bruchim Abayim, welcome to the Farbrengen, Hisvadus Chassidim, commemorating Chof Av, the Hilula of the Rebbe's father. As per the Rebbe's personal request in a letter from Tafshim Mem Daled, that Chassidim should spend time during the Hilula learning of his father's Torah, the programming over the last 2 hours has focused just on that. Chof Av is the Rebbe's personal day, which he shared with us, as we'll discuss later in this Farbrengen. As Chassidim, we desire to spend this day with the Rebbe. And although many of us cannot be actually here at the Rebbe's Ohel due to the current matzav, through this live broadcast, we have the opportunity to be connected with the Rebbe's Daled Amos. Every year, starting from Tashin Yud, the Rebbe would hold a Farbrengen on Chof Av. The Rebbe would make a siyum and spoke often about the Mesiras Nefesh of his father, deriving relevant lessons for us to learn from. As was mentioned earlier, being a day that there was the Rebbe's father's Yahrtzeit, it was a day that was personal to the Rebbe. In the early years, it was not common at all for the Rebbe to Farbreng on a day that was quote-unquote personal. For example, it wasn't until the Tashin Lamids that Farbrengens on Yud Aleph Nisan became a common phenomenon. For certain Chassidim, Chof Av was viewed as just such a time to be by the Rebbe, when it was perhaps extra special and more personal in nature. In fact, the Rebbe opened the Farbrengen on Chof Av Tashin Mem Hey, explaining that even though seemingly his father's Yahrtzeit is a matter that is connected to him personally, nonetheless, since the reason for the opposite of Arichas Yamim, meaning his premature Estalkos, was due to the work on behalf of the Klal, for which she was sent to Galus and suffered terribly and passed on as a result of the Galus. This makes his Hilula something that is the Chatchila Shaykh to everyone. In many ways, the Rebbe regarded his father similar to the way he regarded the Rabbi Seinu Nisiyenu, whether it was by teaching his Torah in a manner that was similar to the teaching of the way the Rebbe taught the Torah of the previous Rabbeim, quoting his Torah in Mamarim alongside the other Rabbeim, publishing his Torah in a sharblat, a cover page design reserved for the Tzemach Tzedek, singing the Rebbe's father's niggin on many occasions, perhaps the niggin most started by the Rebbe throughout the Nesiyos. Something very interesting that I saw in last night's Living Torah, which, by the way, is a masterpiece, and if you have not yet watched it, I recommend you do, is from a sikha from Chof Av Lamates, where the Rebbe declared that essentially all of his Torah is from his father. With the added koch and excitement recently in the Rebbe's father's Torah, we're discovering many similarities between the Rebbe's Torah and that of his father. Nonetheless, when you hear these words from the Rebbe, it drives that nekuda home much stronger. The Rebbe said in Tafshim Mem Ches that after the Frierdiker Rebbe left Russia, the only remaining descendant of the Alter Rebbe, Mittel Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek in that country was the Rebbe's father, to whom people turned for guidance. Due to his activities in spreading Torah and Chassidus, he was imprisoned and ended up in Galus, where he passed away al Kiddush Hashem. To start off tonight's Farbrengen, we will hear from the Rebbe's Shliach to Brighton Beach and the Rosh Yeshiva of Chayav Torah, Rabbi Zushe Winner.
First of all, l'chaim, it's Farbrengen. My favorite story about Rebbe Levi begins with a Yiddish mama knocking on his door late at night. Rebbe Levi opened the door and she begs Rebbe Levi to do her a favor. She has a son who's a communist, and he has a high position in the Communist Party. This son is married to another Jewish woman whose family has a high position also in the Communist Party. And she begs her son to have a chuppah. And he was very reluctant because he's a communist. Finally, he convinced his son, she says to Rebbe Levi, to have a chuppah. And by midnight, in about an hour, they're both going to be here. And I beg you, make a chuppah. Because he said only by you he would make the chuppah, and no one is supposed to know about it. Rebbe Levi says, yeah, of course. At midnight, a knock on the door, a young couple walks in, and Rebbe Levi writes a ksuva, a chuppah daf ab ma minyan, So he puts together a minyan. So they're ready for the chuppah. The Rebbe and Chana prepared a tablecloth, a large tablecloth, Dasit Zayin Bimkoim chuppah, and they're ready to roll. Problem is, Sefelt at center. There's a 10th man is missing. So they tell Rebbe Leivik, we only have 9. So Rebbe Leivik says, in the building complex, there's another person. This guy, he's a Yid. Tell him, I'm calling him. So they look at Rebbe Leivik. He's the informant for the NKVD. He's working for the communist government. So just to call him. The person comes, Rebbe Leivik asks, what do you want? It's past midnight. Rebbe Leivik tells him, we need a minyan, and you're the 10th. The guy looks at him like he's, what kind of such a request? Immediately, the man walks in, he sees there's people, everyone's looking in the other direction, not facing this guy. He goes to the windows, he pulls down the shades, and Rebbe Leivik starts the ksuva, the chuppah, the kiddushin, the brachas. Soon everything is over. The chas and kala immediately leave. Everyone else is trickling out. There were 2 men who stayed. One was the person who was working for the NKVD. And they come to Rebbe Leivik and they say, they hold their party, the Communist Party membership cards, and they say to Rebbe Leivik, we don't believe in this anymore. After what we saw, what you did here tonight, we don't believe in this. What's so special about this story? 2 things. Number 1, the Mesiras Nefesh of Rebbe Leivik. Number 2, L'chura, what is he having Mesiras Nefesh for? These are 2 communists who don't want the chuppah. So there's an alte mama, shedvila machuppah. He's going Mesiras Nefesh, getting other people involved in this Mesiras Nefesh, Maimed and Sakana, calling for the 10th, for the minyan, a person who's working for the MVKVD, for who, for what, for when? Is this going to have any hemshech that this couple is going to be connected? Is this maybe the last Yiddish thing they ever do? And they're forced to do it. The Yiddish mama was veint and is begging that they should do it. For that is worth all this Mesiras Nefesh, Maimed and Sakona, him and the whole minyan, and especially calling this guy. What's going on here? No, we have to say that Rebbe Leivik didn't see communists. Rebbe Leivik, like his son the Rebbe, when he saw a Yid, member of a communist party, a long haircut, a ponytail, ahi, naher, he saw Neshamas Yisrael, he saw Yechidah Shebenefesh. So therefore, there's no such a thing as a communist. And even the guy who works for the NKVD, when he made so much trouble for the people in that building complex, Rebbe Leivik looked at him in a different way. This is a mezak, the Yahrtzeit Levi Yitzchok. How does the Yahrtzeit Levi Yitzchok is how to look and a Yahrtzeit Chassidish Kabbalic way the hashkafa of Rebbe Levi Yitzchok. That he didn't look at them as communists. He didn't look at this person working for the NKVD. He looked at these persons that they have and a shaman shasat to be tohoidehi, this yechidah shebenefesh, and therefore you do whatever you have to do to enable these Yidden to do a mitzvah. B'chlal, in talking about the Yahrtzeit Levi Yitzchok, this is something that his hashkafa, everything in his hashkafa had his Kabbalah, and which is Torah, and a look in it. We're talking about a Farbrengen, a Bechein of the Kabbalah of Rebbe Leivik. No, the Rebbe Taka took the sichas of the Rishimas of Rebbe Leivik, and he put it in the Atzir of Chassidus, and even Avodas Hashem, v'chulu, v'chulu. But the point over here is that Rebbe Leivik had a certain hashkafa, and that we have to put it in ourselves. There's a fascinating Rishima that is printed in the Likutei Levi Yitzchok, where he writes about his life. He wrote it already when he was in Golus. It mentions Almata over there. And he writes about why this is all happening. His imprisonment, his suffering. He doesn't use the word suffering, but all of the redifas that he received by the communists. And it's a 2-page or a page and a half Rishima. And he's looking at it in a Teirah way, Teirah Sakabala. Of course, there is dinim against him. There is judgment, there's strictness, there's jail, there's imprisonment. His name is Levi Yitzchok. So he writes, Shmi Levi Yitzchok. Was is Gvuris? It's a Sfiris, it's Gvura. Levi is Gvura, like I said, brought in Chassidus, that Shevet Levi is Gvura, Koyanim is Chesed. And Yitzchak is from the Avis, is the Gvura. Then he makes a cheshbon that the first time he was imprisoned, still in Yekaterinoslav, he calculates the days. 303 days. What's 303? Everything is munduik. Of course it's 303. Because 303 is begamatria the nekuda shva. Come, it's pasach tzeda, segel, there's a shva. And shva is shin beis aleph. Is 303. Now it says in Kabbalah, it's brought in Chassidus, that the nekudas correspond to the spheres. And the shva corresponds to spheres HaGevura. So of course it was 303 days, because it's the Gevura, he's Gevura, his name is Gevura, this name is Gevura, he connects his mother's name with Gevura. And that's why, when they decreed Golas for him, 5 years Golas, because 5 is a Hey Gevuras. And that's why, when did they decree this, him, when he writes, was in Leila Shana Rabbah. What's a Shana Rabbah? The Shana Rabbah is, state in Zayir, is the end of the Mei Din. So there's Din, and Gvura, and Mishpat. It all has to do with Gvuras. And he makes a cheshbon, he was sitting, 5 times he was imprisoned. Why 5? Gvuras. And he goes on and on and on. Nothing happens by itself. Things that seem to be stam, 5 times in jail, 303. Sit and make a cheshbon 303 days. You're counting days he's in jail. Come on. No, everything is meduyik. This is looking. What does it have to do with us? Looking at everything in our life that it's part of. And a teirah de kashkafa. A teirah de kashkafa. The Teirah Levi Yitzchok. We have to apply it to ourselves, how to have a different hashkafa. Things don't just happen, and it's all part of the Eibishter's cheshbon, and the whole world was created through Teirah. So therefore, it has to shtim. Everything has to shtim with Teirah. So we know the Maimori has Zoyer. If it's a Rebbe Yossi, a Rebbe Lazar, a Rebbe Shimon, all has to shtim. And they walked over here and they picked up a stick. Everything has to shtim. But also in his whole life, in his personal life, how many days he's the first time in jail, and how many years of gold, all this has to fit with inyonim, sharshim lamayla. That's the whole year of Kabbalah, that everything is down here below is connected with what's going on lamayla. What was his tainig when he was in prison, in Golas? Miserable Golas. If you read the stories, they sent him to this far-faced place, primitive life. The people there were primitive people. The diseases that was there, the bugs, the mosquitoes, what's going on, was a terrible place. And the Rebbe Tzimchana came over there, and what did she bring? What did he need? He didn't need any physical comforts. He needed Sfarim. So she brought Zoyer. Zoyer, the Rebbe Leivik, was a Mekubal Zoyer. And what was his only moment of peace and tainig in that terrible, miserable place? He was learning Zoyer, and he's Machadish Kedushim Zoyer. He was Machadish Kedushim Zoyer. You can see they printed the copies of the pictures of the pages of the Zoyer. On the margins of the Zoyer is written all the Kedushim. So here's in a miserable place, terrible place, Begashmias, and he's writing Pirushim on Zoyer. Who would see this? Who would care about it? Would these Ksavim ever get out of this terrible, miserable, primitive place? Nobody knows. But now we have it. It's printed. The Rebbe included it even in the Basi Lagani Maimorim, a hemshich to the Drushim of Rabbi Seinu Nesienu. What's the Nekuda? What's the Bechein? Teirah. Each in its own way, and Pnimiyas Teirah, Nishmasa Deraisa, and that it's not stamazay an union of learning that should taka give us a chayas in this terrible time of Golus that we are in now, but also to see and to have the right hashkafa and everything we see in the world around us. There's big things is happening in the world. The world is going crazy. The Rebbe was talking about 25, 30 years ago that the Welt shackelt sich, it's all shaking and quaking. And today it's even, it's quaking even worse, violent shaking and quaking. And you have to find what's going on over here, what's going on over here. There's a left, there's a right. We have to know there's no left and there's no right. There's Torah. And what is Torah? What is Chassidus? What's the Torah de Hashkafa? In the things that's going on in the world, what's the Torah de Hashkafa? What's the Chassidish Hashkafa? What's the Pnimis Torah de Hashkafa? In our own life and everything around us. And that brings us to the second point of his Mesiras Nefesh. What's Mesiras Nefesh? In the Torah, Levi Yitzchok is Mesiras Nefesh. The moderator, the chairman spoke, mentioned before this, Mesiras Nefesh of Rebbe Levi and Mesiras Nefesh. And Taka was Mesiras Nefesh Pshuti because of the arbet that he did. This is one story of many, many stories. And the Rebbe mentioned also in the Sichas about the story with the matzah, that he had Mesiras Nefesh, and he rubbed the government the wrong. He was the government. He was fearless. Think about it, calling the guy who's the informant for the Communist Party. Think about it. He was fearless. The ganze Sache hat nicht gehabt kein Betreff. It's nothing. And this is Taich Mesiras Nefesh. Ad kedei kach Mesiras Nefesh mamish. And Itaka, like was mentioned before, his Mesiras Nefesh cost. It cost him. They killed him. They didn't shoot him, but they put him in a place which was miserable, with disease, and that was it. Therefore, there was a stalkus. It was Mesiras Nefesh k'pshutei. So, what lesson could that have for us? Mesiras Nefesh. What's Mesiras Nefesh? And the Emma says, think about the Maimer V'ata Tetzava. The Maimer V'ata Tetzava, it's based on a Maimer of the Friedrich Rebbe. The last Maimer that the Kuntas the Rebbe gave us is the V'ata Tetzava. And it's based on a Maimer from the Friedrich Rebbe. And the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, is talking about that Tkufa, about the Tkufa, communist, Russia, Redifis, Gzeiris. And the Friedrich Rebbe was talking to them about this is a special time because Ein Hazayis Noisnes Shamnei Ashakoichin say the olive doesn't give its oil until you crush it, and when there's Gzeiris, this brings out Mesiras Nefesh, and the Shedish of this Mesiras Nefesh, the Chidesh of Neshama, and this is the biggest times in Jewish history. It talks about Purim, that when was the Kiblu V'Kibla Yehudim. The real Matan Torah was on Purim because the Yidden stood in Mesiras Nefesh, Shana Shlema. If a Yid would have Chaz v'Sholem Shmad, he would have been out of the Gzeir of Haman and of Achashverosh. So the Rebbe, and the Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe in the Maimer, in the first program of that Maimer, brings out this inyan, that the inyan of Kosis Lamor, what's Taich Kosis Lamor? You want to get to the more, you want to get to the more, the Chidesh of Nefesh, the Atzmus, it's in a time of Gzeiras, this brings out the best. And then the Rebbe's Mamshech in that Maimer, and he says, Kosis Lamor is not only in communist Russia, but Kosis Lamor is in America. He didn't use the word America, but it's clearly in the Maimer. When it's good begashmias, and he speaks about Chassidim who, during communist Russia, were tziyurim, and in America, they lost it. And what does the Rebbe say? That it could be begashmi is good, and there's also kasis lamor. There's kasis lamor. What says kasis lamor? Everything is good. There's gashmias, there's ruchnias, everything, whatever you need, you have. So what says kasis lamor? So the Rebbe explains that Kosis Lamor is the Taich, as is in Gansel Zetreiselt, that is nicht doch in Gili Alakus. The Mashiach, he's totally shook up because there's no Gili Alakus. And a Yid has in himself that if there's no Mashiach didn't come, and he uses the Maimer Chazal Doir as the Beis HaMikdash Lo Nivne B'Yamav is Kilu Nechrev B'Yamav. And he says, Ad kedei kach should this affect us? Ad kedei kach should we be moved, not stam moved, in ganzel zertreiselt, kosis lamoir. And that is inherent in every Yid. And so what's pshat over here? And he's saying, basically, there's two sides of the coin of kosis lamoir, which really is the same coin. It's the same gilu yechida. He talks about the gilu of yechida. There's the gilu yechida in the worst of times, which is during the oppression and the gzeiras and the redifas under communism, which the Yahrtzeit-Hilula, Rebbe Levi was so part of it, and he made it, so to say, the ultimate price mizokt. He gave up his life in Mesiras Nefesh Kipshute, so that's that Kosis Lamoir. And then the Rebbe says that Kosis Lamoir could be in America in the best of times. Not in the worst, in the best of times. Why? Because there's a Yechida, and we have in ourselves a certain neshama that needs a likus, that needs Yemesa Mashiach. It's not something the Rebbe is not saying, and the Rebbe expects that from us. He's saying that to every Yid, that we have in ourselves something that we feel an emptiness, that there's no Gili Likus. And I know you're going to have Spitz Chabang, Gili Likus, what it means, Gili Likus means this, Gili Likus means that. He's talking Kapshute, Gili Likus, Veroka Bosser Yachdov, Kepiavai Dibber, Gili Likus, Mashiach Lama, Gili Likus, Geula Lamata Masor, Tvach, mit der ganze Trask, which the Rebbe hat sich gekocht in, v'chulu. That is the Vechom. We're not expected Mesiras Nefesh because it's not on the pay. It's not on our day. It's not going on. But the Rebbe says it's in the same mehus. In fact, he says the Gilei Yechida, that is when a Yid wants Gilei Likus, that's a level of Yechida that's higher. Es dort Isis and Haskalah, wie the Yechida is Mushish and Atzmus. Tifa Isis and Haskalah. Akaponim Pashtais, it's a higher darga than the Gilei of Yechida, which the Chassidim and the Yidden had Mesiras Nefesh in Russia. So each one of us has to apply this in this Farbrengen. So each one has to apply it in their own life and their Yonim. Seidingen von Teres Levi Yitzchok, und Seidingen von Teldes Levi Yitzchok, und machen zusammen Alekuti Levi Yitzchok, und soll sicher sein Tag zu der Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take of Yad Mamash, L'chaim.
One of the special aspects of the Chof Av Farbrengens in the later years was the participation of the campers of Machne Gan Yisrael, to whom the Rebbe gave special attention. In the Chof Av Sichos, the Rebbe would also often focus on chinuch and learning from the Yahrtzeit-Hilula and his Mesiras Nefesh. As we approach the Nushnas Halimudim, we should certainly take some time to contemplate ways to fortify the chinuch of our children, especially, perhaps more so, in the area of Chassidishkeit and Iskashros. Another theme that the Rebbe would often address during the Chof Av Farbrengens was the importance of promoting inyanim of l'shavas yitzara, encouraging belief in Hashem and morality, moral behavior for all of humanity. Sheva mitzvahs, a moment of silence, education day, etc. The world desperately needs to hear these messages now more than ever. The Rebbe gifted us a message, and the world is thirsting for it. And we have the mandate to share it. Of course, we need to use seichel, how to share it, where to share it, and when to share it. So while the world debates if schools will open in person or remotely, we know that from a chinuch perspective, there's a message that goes deeper and needs to be heard by the leaders in our communities, regardless of how the mechanics of education will work over the next few months. To continue tonight's Farbrengen, we now have the pleasure to listen to words of inspiration from the director of the Merkez Chinuch Office, Rabbi Nochum Kaplan.
Chaim, Chaim, Chaim Yisrael. Huh? I will simply spend a few minutes telling a couple of stories that are very personal to me. And I'm sharing them with you because each one of these stories encapsulates within it an aspect that we need to learn from Ohel Levi's life. Chof Tzadik Beis was a very difficult year for Yidden in Russia. And Tzadik Gimel was more difficult, and the years were progressively worse from Tzadik Beis until Tzadik Tes. Until Chof Tzadik Aleph, Vechom were permitted to learn here and there, and some of the communists let the blind eye, made believe they didn't see. There was a yeshiva, the Machteres in Kremenchuk, the Machteres in Kharkov. These yeshivas were disbanded, and Vechom had to go to this loch and to that loch. A dozen Vechom were sent here and a dozen there. And among those that the cities to which they sent a dozen Vechom was Yekaterinoslav. And among the Vechom that were sent to Yekaterinoslav was an uncle of mine. And I want to tell us a few stories that I heard from him personally. Was ich geschmack im Meiselach. Tu B'Shvat, Chof Tzadik Beis, fell out on the Shabbos. Rebbe Levi never said droshes. He was the Chassidish Horav in the community. There were a variety of shuls in the community. He davened in one particular shul, the Givus Ados in Rov shul. He would chazach chassidus there every Shabbos. Tife Maimorim, Tife Biyurim Chassidus. The Amcha, the typical balabos in Yekaterinoslav, was not shaykh to understand his words. The few Chassidish Yidden that were there, and there weren't that many, were also not of the kind and of the level who could understand Rebbe Levi's Kabbalah in Yonim. Aber mis gesessen zu Shalashudis, when Rebbe Levi came to Shul, so the Balabatim who were a little bit closer came and they listened. Adroshe Bechlal Bachsidish Rabbonim is given a weite Sach. Zog Godrush. A Balabatische Rov, a Bachsidische Rov. And Rabbi Levi announced that on Tu B'Shvat he is going to give Adroshe. Adroshe from Rov. Now let's understand, there was a very large Jewish community in Yekaterinoslav, tens of thousands of Jews. But the vast majority of them were not what you and I would consider Chassidish Yidden. There was a very strong Zionist group there, and Bundisten and Paskanyakis, whatever you want, lived in Yekaterinoslav. They had one thing in common, all of them, and that was a meredike der cheretz for the Rov of Yekaterinoslav. While there was opposition when he first came to take the position, but over time, and over the 20 years that he was already been Meshabesh Barabonis, the whole community was bottled for him. They may have had differences of opinion, but the Rov, and that was not just the case in Yekaterinoslav. That was the case all over Ukraine. The name Rabbi Levi Yitzchok Shneerson was a name that everybody recognized, and recognized for his atzilus, an individual who's mishich mevamaylo govea mikolom, for the emes, for the Torah that he said. All the Rabbonim of Ukraine were bottled for him. And now Rabbi Levi Yitzchok Shneerson makes the announcement, as geht zogen Adroshe Tu B'Shvat. Now you have to understand also that Tu B'Shvat was something that the communists despised the very idea. Because the Zionists said that Tu B'Shvat is a great Yontif. For Rabbi Levi to come and say, as geht reden Tu B'Shvat, ist untergerätzt. And the whole community came. Anoshim, Noshim, V'taf. Everybody came. A full shul. Und der Rov ist Ruf auf die Bime. And he asks a simple klotzkasha. We're celebrating Tu B'Shvat, which is Rosh Hashanah Leilonis. But if you go outside, it's cold and it's frozen and you can't walk out without a coat. All the trees are bare. Why is this called Rosh Hashanah Leilonis? It seems like a misnomer. It doesn't belong. The name doesn't belong there at all. No, but then we celebrate Tu B'Shvat as Rosh Hashanah Leilonis because somewhere far away the sun is shining and there is a tree that is beginning to blossom. Somewhere far away it's warm. Why do we care if somewhere far away it's warm? Because it's Eretz Yisrael. We may be here, but Doten, that's our kesher to Eretz Yisrael is an everlasting one. And he spoke at length. Es ist kalt auf dem Gas. And everybody understood what he was talking about. The metaphor was perfect. The kriris outside, the communism, was such that you had to wear a coat. And he said you have to put on a coat to protect yourself from the cold. But remember hope. Remember the future. Remember the fact that somewhere down the line, we are tied to Eretz Yisrael und dort nis warm. Und als dort nis warm darf uns sein warm. We too should be warm knowing that the truth is that this is Rosh Hashanah Leilonis al Piteire. And the community, everybody, perfectly understood what he was saying. There was a hisayrus that emanated from there. We need to be able to galvanize our keches and recognize that it's cold outside. That's one story. A second story. Years later, 10 years later almost, the year is Tafshin. And the Rebbe's mother writes in her diary, Midav zar greiten zach auf Pesach, it's Pesach Tafshin, and there is nothing. And I want to spend a moment explaining to you what nothing means. They sent Rebbe Levi to a town, if you want to call it that, a wild backwater, which was a desert, where trees didn't grow, only cacti. You couldn't find a tree to be able to cover a piece of faschach for a sukkah. It wasn't a town with any kind of organization. It was farmers who got together, a few farmers, and what were they farming already? Basically, it was behemoths. And they got together, and this was a place that they came to sell their wares to little people who were living around them. The Greise Stott. Chile was a backwater, as were other little towns like that throughout Kazakhstan. And she writes, Midavdoch epes kochen af yontif, mele sinito vos, obe sinito afilo in vos. They had a pail made of tin, and that was their only pot to cook in. And whatever she had cooked already, was mit zu kochen, was chometz after all. Wundent das anayas fessel. Where do you get a new pot? Can you imagine? It was a town, such a backwater, you couldn't buy a new pot. But she knew that 4 hours away there was a community called the Monazach Balden Aminut. Nicht Gziloda. Janje Kugan. Gziloda ist ein Städtel. Janje Kugan. And in Janje Kugan, there was also some people verschickt. Among them was my grandfather, who was a Rov there. Benzin Gaisinski was there as a sheikhet, mit the Beiden verschickt from Kiev. And the head of the Frum community in Kiev also, a Yid whose name was Moshe Kolikov, hat man eich verschickt dahin. So because they had a sheikhet, und hat gebracht mit sich a Chalef, so they could shech the beheme. And the shtetl given a bissel größer, but the shtetl was 4 hours away. 4 hours by train. So the Rebbetzin went, got a ticket, spent 4 hours going there. She went to my grandfather's house, who called Moshe Kolikov, mit ihr eingeordnet. Fleisch und Fisch und mit gemacht an Nayum Emer auf Pesach. They went to a blacksmith and they got him to take a new piece of tin and they made an emer, a pail. That's what they cooked in. Und sie gewinnt Simcha besossen. Sie fragen ein Emer und sie sagen ein Stückel Fleisch und sie fragen ein Stückel Fisch. Und nicht nur das, mit gebackt Matze dort. Stellt sich vor. Und sie gewinnt Matze Schmureich. She came back to Chile, a freilacher Mensch. They wouldn't let her carry the fish and the meat. She carried the matzah, but they sent a special messenger. That's how they had derech eretz for Rabbi Levi and his Rebbetzin. She's going to go and schlep shopping bags. They sent somebody specially that she shouldn't have to schlep it. She brought the matzah. And she writes there, mir haben schon gemacht Pesach. Wir haben gemacht Pesach und a Seder, and they even had an Eirach of Pesach. And then she finishes off this keta saying, was hat man gerett beim Seder? Wir haben gerett wegen dem Ova von Jiden, wegen dem Heve hat man nicht gerett. We didn't talk about the present. We spoke about the past. And we spoke about the future with hope. Sitting there in a hovel among the Uzbeken. And she writes there were Goyim outside making fun. They were singing a little bit, and the Goyim was standing and throwing rocks, little stones at the window. And what were they talking about? They were talking about the Hoive. Whatever it is today is today. We don't dwell on the problems of now. We need to think with hope and with bitochen that the Osid will be different. That's Reb Levik's message, the Rebbetzins message of the first Pesach that they spent in Chile. Im Mokem is faran v'sivarim aplatz, and we know that in Zman there will be Mirz Hashem Anosid. Noch a Meisel. As a sidebar, my uncle told me, he went into Reb Levik, and Reb Levik was very happy to see he and another Bacha went in, and he said, oh, let me sagen l'chaim. And they brought out mashke, this is back in Yekaterinoslav, they brought out mashke, and he said, Bamir is haint a yontif. A yontif? He said, Bamir is haint a yontif because today I received a letter from my son, and I'm going to quote verbatim as I heard it from my uncle, hat mir schon lang übergejuckt. He passed me a long time ago. Membele, ich gave a yontif by him, and he wanted to say l'chaim with a couple of bochim. That's a sidebar. Noch a Meise. Everybody knows. We've spoken about it many times. The Rebbe geredet wegen them. The Mesiras Nefesh of the Rebbetzin to make ink so he should be able to write. And Rabbi Winner pointed out, Cholam gehen schreiben for Vemen. Vemen ist einmal onkommen. It was a dream. The whole thing was so far-fetched that sitting there in that gullus, we can't even imagine the depth of gullus. There's not a human being to talk to. Nothing. Dust in the streets and Wilder's becken. That's all it is. And somebody of that kind of character has to sit among these people. I mean, it's just, sie nicht zu leben, als er sagt. And what was he thinking? What was she thinking? Sie Mesiras Nefesh to be able to all schreiben a Stücke Letere. Years later, the Rebbetzin was able to leave Russia, and on the way coming to the United States, like all of us who went through that Golus, she stopped in Poking, and she spent a number of months in the winter of Tovshin Zion in Poking. Poking was an old army base with long barracks. In every barrack, which was 100 feet long, every 10 feet they had another family living. So they divided with plywood, divided up the long barracks into rooms 10 feet wide, about 7 or 8 feet, and every family had a room. It just so happened that the Rebbetzins' room was next to our room, next to my parents and my room. So on the day of my bar mitzvah, I'm telling you a ganze Maise, but it's interessant. I was walking to 770, and I meet the Rebbetzin on Kingston Avenue. And I said to Hein, mir geworden bar mitzvah. So she says to me, du gedenkst, ich bin den gelaufen in Poking und unter na Jammelke? Do you remember? And she laughed. I was a year old. Do I remember her chasing me to put on a Jammelke when I was a year old? Ein bisschen schwer zu gedenken von ein Jahr alt. And she says, and I'm repeating it because I want everybody to hear it, dafke because it's on a Zoom. And she says to me, ich hab gehört von meinem Mann, I heard from my husband, that a child should never be let out, begilui rosh, without a hitel ongeton. My mother would let me outside, and she put on a little hat gerade, and I didn't like it, so I tore it off. So she spent her time chasing me when I went outside to put the hat on my head, weil sie hat gehört vom Mann, als ein Kind lost mir nicht a Ruiz, on a Jammelke, was ist negeh zu Yira Shemayim. And gerade today I learned the Gemorre, was a Gemorre Meforeshes. The Gemorre erzählt, Rabbi Nochum Levi Yitzchok says that his mother heard from a soothsayer, some goy said that this boy is going to be a ganef. And she was very much afraid. Somebody had gesagt that Divrei Nevi'is, Rabbi Nochum Levi Yitzchok is going to be a ganef. So how do you make sure that the child is going to grow up properly? So the Gemara says she never let him outside begilui rosh. She never let him walk outside without making sure that he had covering on his head. And she says, the Gemara says so. Ki heichad leheila yiras shamayim, poshet kipshute. So Rabbi Levi was medayik, told her, Aim said, it's going to the Gemara. Aim said, Rishmai Aleh. Yeah. Es ist eine Sache zu wissen, mit Tornisch, a ruislosener Kind, every child needs to walk around at all times, dafke bekisse rosh. And one final word, halben Wörterle. The Hakoras HaTev that the Rebbe had, the Rebbe is Zogeret, but the Rebbe had privately and didn't show publicly the Kibbutz Av, the Kibbutz from the Rebbe we saw. We saw the Rebbe's Kibbutz. They're going to the mother all the time, the way he looked at her, the way he, everything, just the whole yachas. Those of us who were there and saw it, ein kedugmosa. But the Kibbutz Av, anybody who did anything for Rabbi Levi, anything at all, privately and only privately, the Rebbe acknowledged and thanked and was mekarev specially for it. Stiller Reit, a nod. My father used to say, the Rebbe told my father every Chof Av to say l'chaim. A nod. A nod, and that's it. He knew he had to say l'chaim. Because my father also traveled a number of times to give Rabbi Levi to machen at the Sobkochen for him, whatever the case was. Be mishamish Rabbi Levi. So, was darf mir nehmen davon? Wir nehmen an Orges, was ist Scheiches zu uns. The first thing is, mir guckt nicht auf die Zores, was mir leid. Jeder einer, a Bocher hat seine kleine Geschäften. Everybody has issues that he's dealing with, pressures that he's dealing with in the Hoive. And they can get you down. These pressures can really oppress you. And if they get you down, you can't think properly. And certainly not bepoil anything. The lessons for the few stories I told was you never let outside pressures get you down. Was ist fran an osid? If it's difficult here, but somewhere else, there's a reason for this, but somewhere else somebody is able to make up and you will gain from it later on. Never to be limited or mitzumtzim by the Schwierigkeiten and the difficulty we're going through. Ein Sach. Und the zweite Sach is, never ever forget the Hakoras HaTev. To be able to say thank you properly. The Avas Reim that it builds. It's a lesson that we saw from the Rebbe all the time. The Yashakeach, every time somebody poured a glass of water. The Yashakeach of the Rebbetzin, we saw his constant yachas to people like Reb David Raskin, that was Mishamish Reb Levi in his last half a year. I mean, the yachas was unbelievable. The Rebbe was miyaker, everything that David Raskin or Shalom did, because that Mishamish you in the Taten. Der Rebbe ist zu helfen. Wir sollen sich etwas ablernen davon, der erste Sache. Und zweitens, miyaker sein Al-Kolponim, was der Rebbe hat uns gewollt lernen davon. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Shukayach, Rabbi Kaplan. L'chaim, l'chaim. As previously mentioned, the Rebbe writes in a postscript to a letter from Matzei Tisha B'Av, Tavshin Mem Daled. Hashabbos Kodesh al Achrei Tesvav b'Menachem Av hu Chof b'Menachem Av. Yom Yahrtzeit-Hilula shel Horav Levi Yitzchok ben Rabbi Zikni Baruch Shneir Zechrein Levracha Zeh 40 Shana. V'alai Achiv v'azchus Gadol la'atzia u'levakesh v'chulu lilmoid b'hisvadas mitirasei u'lenadiv b'yom adein l'zechen ishmasei shemasar nafshei al afatzas hayadas b'seichei b'nei Yisrael me'acherei masach habarzel. V'yachavish b'vesa asurim v'nishpat l'galus u'meis b'goyla v'sham v'nuchasi kavid zchus l'yagan aleinu v'al kol Yisrael shlita. We learn together and Farbrengen together. We still will continue to Farbrengen together. And we should bring this inspiration into practice as well. In addition to the different things that were mentioned earlier tonight, lessons, there are a few things that we might consider. We can, throughout the day, at some point, Farbrengen together with our family or fellow Anash, and learn something from Horav Levi Yitzchok together with a beer from the Rebbe. The newly released Teras Menachem Tiferes Levi Yitzchok is a great resource and a worthwhile investment. There are a plethora of materials connected to Chof Av that could be found on vechom.com/Chof Av on the website. Videos, articles, and much more. And it's really a beautiful website. Yashikeach to Vechom for the valuable resource. Consider perhaps learning Mishnayos in the name of the Rebbe's father on this day. Also, each year, the Rebbe would hold a magbis on Chof Av during the Farbrengen for Keren Levi Yitzchok. You could participate in this magbis at magbis.org. Also, as mentioned earlier, if you have not yet already done so, it will be worthwhile to watch this week's Living Torah, and it could be found at 70years.com. Our final speaker who will speak to us during tonight's Farbrengen is the Mashpia of Timchet Mim HaMerkazes, Rabbi Shlomo Zarchi.
I'm not a speaker like the first speaker. I can learn up a better point. A couple in English. We were here all the years, a lot of years, the Rebbe verbracht. Certain years, it's a mimer can sicher, and later you shall saying a mimer, yeah, and later chops, yeah. Until in one of the Amorim was Chav Zayin, I think, in Boy Ekev, the Rebbe said, by the end of the Maimah, as you look in Shal Tzadikim, others, Kirchum Beis HaMikdash or Chum Beis HaMikdash. The Lishain is that the Rebbe should say on the Rebbeim. Not every older Chassid understood it, but the Rebbe said it, and then later on, the Rebbe starts mentioning in Mamor from Rosh Hashanah, and V'chulu, yeah. From the later years, even the Hakofis, the Rebbe was more excited. They should start his father's niggun by the Hakofis that he danced. We start at least by the first of the seven, but the seventh to sing that niggun here. The Rebbe's father was a great, not from a great man. See, people didn't understand his generation who the Rebbe's father is. They couldn't understand that in Chassidim itself, there could be a person, Meshichmu, the Meile Geweya, like the Mittler Rebbe's had big Chassidim, you know, Rabbonim, and Heilige Eden. He was a higher person, that the person in his generation, not everybody understood it. That's why we have to do a lot of things for the Rebbe's father, because a lot of Eden in the Moleka time did not understand it and did not help him how much they could have helped him. That's what their children of these people, our Chassidim Bechlal today, had to do very much. And Rebbe's father was a very higher person, a very special person. We heard from the Rebbe's Sichos and the Hushim Azea and Bechlal, and the famous letter of the Rebbe when the Rebbe and his brother were in Germany, Purim, and the Rebbe spoke about that, that Rabbi and Rebbe Zere, they were bringing Purim together, and the Rabbi Schachtler Rebbe Zere. So who was in Germany? That Rabbi, the older brother, and the younger brother of the Rebbe Zere, yeah? He was the younger brother. They were together Purim. You know? That's why the Rebbe's father wrote them this famous letter. The Rebbe spoke about it. He didn't mention the reason, but everybody understood. Rabbi Rebbe Zere then in Berlin was the Rebbe and his brother were there. Yeah. And the Rebbe spoke about the Hosicha of Echais in Keach, from the Alter Rebbe, Mikra and Samach Tzedek, built on the letter of the Rebbe's father, and the Rebbe spoke about it by the Alter Rebbe, everything is Tera and Kutcher Tera, by the Mikra Rebbe, Tera Chaim, Teres Chaim, all the Derech Chaim, it's all Chaim. Chaim is Bina, is Chochme, some Tzedek is Dar. The Rebbe spoke about it by Arichis. Then to Bochem is the famous letter of the Rebbe. There's a letter of the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe sent his father a pair of shoes. That's all. So he said, he wasn't 100 man came and said, what are your shoes? When he saw shoes, he didn't see shoes. He saw the Zayah, he saw the Gemara. It was a Hashvi'i. He saw different things. He saw now, I'm not lying, nothing. I took his hand, the Medrash and the Gemara and the Zayah and the Das. And this is the whole letter about my Mekamis. When he saw something, he was Teire. He didn't see, but he saw the world, he saw the Lakus. He was a mufshitik Eid. He was a very Hashvi'i. He was very gebildet to eat, but it was a mufshit Hazer. Hazer didn't take any place with him. He saw something, he saw Teire, he saw Azayah, he saw Kabbalah, and that's what the people couldn't understand. How could it be a chassid, not a Rebbe, to be in such a high dargah? Till I heard from a chassid, there was once in Moscow. I don't know if he gave to speak here, but fine, I can read now. It was Pesach Sheni, and the Rebbe's father was in Moscow, and the older chassid, no, a bacher. He asked the Rebbe's father to Farbrengen in Moscow, in Russia. If a bach so geschmack, he told him a lot of the things that he said them by Farbrengen. He spoke a lot of things that the Rebbe spoke about Farbrengen, between the Gefulas, by Yisrael Yayin Veyesh, all these Inyan and Gvuras and Gvuras, all these things he spoke to them, but he spoke it with the guy went out of his, and Rabbi Shlomo was with an open mouth, listening every single word. There was one chassid in the back, he spoke like this, a chassid, but on his hair, so eigen the chassidus, yeah. So Rebbe's father asked a few times, what's Tumna say? So nobody wanted to say it. Till somebody said, you're playing the blues, the mocker. They say, zolang ich kein eigen, für Altsche, auf der Ohren gute Tere. Ich wollte mit meinem gute Tere, alt, was ich sage, ist, her Ohren gute Tere, Altsche, John Chassidus. He said, no, I believe in his way. And that's what not every chassid understood this. And that's why there was a lot. Yechon Gordon had a son, Nissen Gordon. He was the only one that didn't have a full beard, a long beard. I call upon him. But he had a schus that he wrote for the Rebbe Sechane in the Yiddish hymn, the whole biography of the Rebbe Levi and her, the whole biography. And the Rebbe went out to his Rabbi before all the big Chassidim of Nissen Gordon. Because he had a schus, he made a nachesh ruach to the Rebbe's father and the Rebbe's mother. And he writes there, but the end, she writes that we got Zach's pasulkas, meaning 6 packages in jail. She writes from all the 4 people, and 2 from a good friend that till today we don't know from who we got it from. Packet that Eid told me that he sent it. He never wrote it to the Rebbe, but he sent it to him. A person told me, what the difference was. But call upon him. But call upon him, I just mean to say, why only 4 because 6 you were able to send? Not every chassid felt, not everyone knew he was in Ukraine, this was in Russia. They didn't have the schus. When the Rebbe's father got some water after days, he didn't have no water to drink and so forth and so forth. He got it right away. He washed nagalas. He didn't wash his hands in a long time. This one, the type of person he was, a Hashvi'i. Right, he washed nagalas and didn't drink again, and so forth and so forth. There's so many stories. Because he gave to Vechom also, Rabbi Nochum spoke about his uncle. There was also another Vechom that kitte for Neville. They, when they closed yeshiva Neville, they sent 7, 8 Vechom in like a Trinnislau. One was Meir Itkin also. He was also the same kitte as Melech Kaplan, yeah. So he said he never went into the Rebbe's father's shul, but some later he went into the Rebbe's father's shul. And the Rebbe Levi saw a bach, he was so tired by him, a bach with him, his tmimim. He was 14, 15 years old. These kids were 14, 15-year-old kids then. He ran over to him and told him, als ich zum Mysterium und hat gesagt, die Scheine steht in Prochim, die Kinema. Prochim geht the order of the Pirchei Kahuna, or the Prochim. She said, the Pirchei Kahuna are from 13 to 20 years old. So Prochim, das ist ein Bocher lernen von 13 bis 20, ist the Kinema, das ist ein Kima von ganzen Leben. So, very important. Horrible lernen, this will lernen. Prochim, der Zeit von Pirchei Kahuna von 13 bis 20, das ist the Kinema, das ist ein Kima von ganzen Leben. Ich habe von ihm, es waren noch solche Sachen. Einer kommt mal von den Getrieben, schaffen Geld, hat er gesagt, ein ganzer Bankier kriegen Geld, und allem, he helped the one Arab is Akbolis. Und ich sage, das muss Drasche Proportion zu Iden dann, ich stehe da, was, jeder soll selber gehen, es war nur Rabbi Yitzchok getrunken, meint, die Gunst ist, was ich gewähnt, ist gewonnen, ist gewonnen ein bisschen vergräbt, ach gut, jeder soll selber gehen, hat er gesagt, was, Liebem. Ich weiß, ich sage, Hachedes ist wel ein das Hachedes ist Liebem. Ich bekisse, hat er gesagt, Hachedes ist eine neue Sache, Chodesh. Eine Yeshiva, eine neue Sache. Eine Sache, Eberheim, eine alte Hachedes, wird zerstört. Eine, was er so ein bisschen mit Guschen, hält er nicht, ist eine alte Sache. Hazer, meint das Heim, mit Vergräb, sagt man so, heuer, sie gewinnen einmal. Aber kein Menschen gehen zu eigen. Und lieber Menschen, jeden Herzen darf nicht tun till Name. A couple from everything he took, and he spoke to everybody in their language. Till the mimer that the Rebbe spoke, and boy ekelig op zijn, hinter de gemoedige mimer, zei dat Masena war aber die Szene, wie in Tanja, das ist die Gile von Yemesa Mashiach, und Elon Matria, und da bezahlt das Zeichen zu den Gersa Kedes. Der Kopf von Masena ist, was man tut, was man darf tun, aber die Szene, man tut mehr, wie man kann, der Rebbe hat für Meimer, als dort Dinge von, was man tut, bis es da echt, an mir halber gehen am Sis Nevish, mir will gehen am Sis Nevish. Das ist auch, egal, dem Starke von Nevish Elikis. Mit Sis Nevish bepeil, Rabbi Kiba, ja, meint, den Start, gewollt haben mit Sis Nevish. Akiddish Hashem. Fein, das ist schon genug, als gewollt. Nein, aber Sis Nevish bepeil, das ist ein gegen den Tebe von Nefesh Ativis, das rupt sich der Hepech Tebe. Das ist aber die Szene, und das ist mehr veraltet, was man gerade bei den Nefesh Kiste verkehrt. Aber der Tat, gehad, des Schuss, ist mit viel gegangen auf Messias Nefesh, weil von der Fundesere, Nostalgie von der Zeit, von dem, was mit dem gepeinigt dorten. Und meistens nicht, der Rebbe Sachane haben sie gehalten, aber nicht aushalten dorten, wie 5 Jahre, mit gemeint, der Rebbe ist auch ein paar Schick dorten. Weil die Persönlichkeit von Rabbi Levi wollte nicht aushalten, man sieht. Und noch ein paar Sachen haben dann Mechase gegeben. Bis jetzt kommt man muss in das Tere, mir hat kein Tere zu tanzen, ich nur mal Tanja und getanzt mit dem Tanja. Auch rum im Tisch die ganze Zeit mit der Tanja, das ist gewesen. Dem Ziel ist für Levi. Der Kopf von ihm ist ein gewinner Hechesoltid. Bis der Rebbe nicht mehr sagen, man sagt, das ist meine Kugel, ja. Und dann gehört hat, der Rebbe Rashab, für mich gerne eine Zigarette, hat das soll verrechnen, falls ein Mistfalkes, dass ein geringer der Übergehen. Er sagt, gerät, Mama ist eben des Falkes, aber man darf sich übergehen nach der anderen Seite, ja. Und jeden erzählen, dass man am Matabe, kleine Schuhe ist, dass man in Schulbase, im Keller, und er gesagt, Agdomis, wir haben kaum gesagt, der Tate seine gesagt, Agdomis, ja. Wir haben gesagt, Agdomis, wir haben gerät, verbracht, und den Tisch, und gesagt, allen den Namen von den Menschen, wer sie sein, und Rebbe ist gestorben, ich in Frankreich, ich in Amerika, ein paar Mal, wir haben einen Tisch, und ich neben dem Namen, geteilt, habe ich Kabbalah, wer sie sein, und bisschen der Rebbe, ja, ein bisschen der Hauptfächer, und die hatten Kinder. Ich meine, in Porking, und so viele Menschen, die gezahlt haben, Rebbe, so haben wir echt nicht. Und nicht gekrogen Holzfeier, waren im Winterschein. Später habe ich noch einen geschickt, einen Brief zum Rebbe, und eigentlich zum Physiker Reden, und beten nach Woche, essen mit Holz, so haben mein Kind. Und deze geboren, de man is naar deze, zo hebben maar voor slijmen, zo neemt daarvan maar voor slijmen. Maar we hebben maar voor slijmen. Het was echt niet dat de kinderzaken aan de gassen. Bij zijn pater heeft me aangezegd dat een lijven bij jullie in Milail, heel kerkjaaien, wat de Rebbe had gezegd, de meisje. En ik weet niet, dat ze dat zo was, de Rebbe het heel bewust van meisje. Had me altijd gedaan te lezen, en ik had het van kinderen, ja. Maar kopen der Mann ist der Mann immer im Brennesverband. Bei Kopf von ihm ist, man hat sich ist das Chof Av, ja, Rebbe ging an der Hashvi'i und dann Rebbe's Tate das Schuss, nein, ich gefallen, so kommt da was das Schuss, haben wir Scheiches, so verbringen, was der Scheiches zum Rebbe's Tate. Und der Rebbe hat verbracht alle Jahren, ein bisschen nun bezig ist, hat verbracht alle Jahren. Und der Rebbe gewollt, muss er verbringen und erzählen und dann. Und der Rebbe gewollt, also Russland, wenn man jeder sagt, und dann wegen den Tieren, also wie manchmal mit der Schicht hat der Rebbe dann gerät, als er Herode von jeder sagt, dass dann der Tiere ist. Und der Rebbe sagt, reden in Kabbalah, da gucken auf Reben in Schule, in der Getriebenesladen. Er gesagt, das sagt Sachen, nannte von der Scheich ist, ein Kopf von ihm, mit geschriebenem Buch von Gottlieb, hat er echt reingestellt, der Meister mit Simcha Gardewski, und als er kommt zum Reben in Stub, hat er geheißen, guckt dann auf Reben, mein Sohn, der Bock, dass man Bauer, Scham, ist zu fragen, es ist für Kabbalah, also das ist eigentlich auf den Sefer, der Rebbe geheißen, Arusum von Sefer. Er hat gesagt, alle Sachen im Sefer, das war wegen seiner Tat, nicht wegen ihm. Bei Kopf von ihm, über Kopf von ihm ist er heimlich Chof Av und sicher, war Farbrengen Meile und der Rebbe's Tate mit Rebbe Bett Nuis alt für alle Chassidim und geben uns ein Geist, und Rebbe's Arbeit, Chassidis und Lernen und der Pfotze und der Webe. Weil das ist zwei Erforschungen, was ich gesehen beim Rebbe's Taten. Von einer Seite gelegen, Hechsenjungen und Kabbalah, von der zweiten Seite haben wir früher gebacken, Matzes. Aber du bist nicht so gewesen, der erste Minion. Was meint der erste Minion? In Schulen, was irgendein kleinen Arbeits- und Schabbat ein paar Kinder gedacht. Ich bin der erste Minion, ich bin nicht so, dass wir was machen, der erste Minion, die ihnen, was darf man gehen, aber Arbeit und Schabbat sollen noch etwas davnen. Sie gestanden auf seinem Porch, sagt man, Mama, ich bin die Schiene und verrechnet das Zigarett, die ihnen sind gelaufen von der Arbeit sollen wissen, dass sie nicht mehr alle Schabbat gemacht. Er hat noch gestanden auf seinem Porch, bis die Schiene und gerechnet auf Papyrus, er weiß, dass er noch alles in Schabbat ist. Es wird getracht, und Meile, bin Käse, und sie wollen Mathe, bin Tachel, sie bewohnen jeder Reine. Bis sie dort gehen, aber wusste von der jüdische Kommunisten noch mehr, von der Biene, eine bewusste Aktion. Und sein Tat gedauert bei Levi. Sein Tat gestorben, hat gewollt, noch Levi soll vernehmen sein Levi in der Klure. Und der ganze Kommunist gesagt, schickt ein Message Levi, ich will wird sein bei der Levi abgenommen, sonst machen keinen Eindruck. Und der Tat gewollt, soll sich vernehmen Levi, never dort sein, er dankt ihm ab. Und gewinnt stille Heid, behalten Heid, sie haben getrost, Leibig, die alle großen Kommunisten, die Yahrtzeit, die großen Chevre, aber im Rebbe's Tate hat man getrost. Im Ganzen, diese eigene Leben haben sie getrost. Das hat man gesehen, die Schneckzovers, wie sie gewinnen, Meile in Käse, zweiten Seite, gewinnen, bei jeder Engel und jeder Sache, wie man für das Meidl, wusste Meister, mit der Gruppe, mit noch als gezendete Meisters. Bis er getanzt auf den Tisch, war durch an der Kapotte, am Rebbe's Kassen hat man getanzt auf den Tisch, ein bisschen schwer, mit zugezogen die Sotukis, mit alles Gott, und sie gewinnen, von allen, muss dicke Eid. Die Ike also einer heißt das, alle Unionen, und so ein Mathemato, die ist alles von allen Unionen. Der Rebbe soll führen zu mich hier, so alle tanzen, so ein bekommen.
Shkoyach Rabbi Zarchi. A special Yashkoyach to Rabbi Zarchi, Rabbi Winner, and Rabbi Kaplan for Farbrengen with us tonight. Tonight's program and Farbrengen were organized by Vad Vechom Iskashers. A tremendous Yashkoyach to Rabbis Mendel Shemtov and Yuri Eisenbach for arranging all of this. Thank you to Rabbi Aberefson from Ohel Chabad Lubavitch, and also to Rabbis Moshe Berghoff and Mendel Shmutkin from Chabad.org for hosting the broadcast. If you enjoyed today's program, please consider contributing towards it at urvachim.com. In closing, the Rebbe mentions in a Sicha, Vav Tishrei Tavshin. Spoken about earlier, the Mesiras Nefesh of the Rebbe's Chana, Rebbe's mother, in providing paper and ink for the Rebbe's father to write the Chidushei Torah. The Rebbe speaks about at length over there the process through which the Ksavim actually got out, which was a story for itself and required extensive Mesiras Nefesh. The way that Rebbetzin left Russia and the fact that having these Ksavim with her was a great danger, and eventually it got out through diplomatic ties throughout Yisrael. And the Rebbe mentions over there that unfortunately there are still Ksavim that are not located and have not yet been brought out. And the Rebbe speaks about seemingly with Agmas Nefesh about that, and speaks about how through the Achlata and actually learning the Torah of the Rebbe's father, this could itself be payil that the possibilities or the actual the coming to fruition of finding those ksavim and bringing them out as the Rebbe wanted, and of course that it will bring about even more than that. It will bring about the hiskalos of Pnimis HaTorah, Torah Chadasha, and with Mashiach's coming, and then of course these ksavim, which are the ksavim from before, will also be niskala. So let us hopefully be Isaac in this and learn the Torah of the Rebbe's father together with the Rebbe's Torah, and be Zeiche, take it from Yad to the Iskalos, and we encourage you to continue Farbrengen wherever you are.